I would like to conceptualize social media platforms as a form of virtual commemorative sites that offer the possibility to co-creatively contribute to a digital culture of memory. And I think this relates clearly to the participatory dimension of social media platforms, and it can also be shown by looking at specific projects and specific ways of using these platforms for the purpose of commemoration. As social media platforms are part of our everyday communication, and as they are also an important tool for self-presentation and self-documentation, I think it is clear that they also have that they also can be seen in parts as a form of semi-public archive of our present lives. So there is a certain way of of preserving the past and making it accessible, or reconnecting to it, which is already inscribed in the logics of social media platforms. And we see this, for example, when Facebook is reminding us of events that happened 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years ago, by just reminding us of a post, of a photograph or something like this, that originated from some ancient times on our timelines. I think it is very obvious that was then also adopted for the purpose of embedding into this presence that social media create with a kind of constant developing feed or timeline for commemoration. So we saw this, for example, with Twitter histories, where projects used Twitter to add to the to the present feeds of users information that referred to events that actually happened in the past. So, for example, information that cover the events of the pogroms in November 1938, so to say, in real time on Twitter. And this, on the one hand, makes an historical event accessible, visible on a social media platform which is used on an everyday basis. But on the other hand, it also creates an interesting, disturbing and irritating effect, because suddenly things that happened in the past mix with things that are happening in the present, and that's why we start to think about it, or maybe to notify it, which we wouldn't notify in another context where we are expecting this information. Of course, we also see that social media platforms adopt specific forms of communication, like, for example, hashtags for commemoration. Hashtag on these days, hashtag OTD is a good example for that. And on the other hand, these hashtags also help to create something like a commemorative community. For example, during the pandemic at the Holocaust Memorial Day, Yad Vashem launched an initiative where they asked users of social media platforms to read names and post these videos with specific hashtags. And through these hashtags, a kind of virtual name reading was created. And an accessible community of people who were commemorating together in this virtual space. In fact, the pandemic and the fact that many memorials had to close had a real kind of a pushing effect for experimenting with the potential of social media for commemoration and for memory. We saw a lot of interesting projects launched by memorial sites and museums. We had virtual tours, pre-recorded virtual tours We had live tours on platforms such as Instagram or YouTube. So all these projects offered the possibility to access the sites remotely from a distance, but they also included participatory elements. For example, you could ask questions through the comment functions, and then the guide during a live tour would answer to them, or you could reply with emojis and things like that. So we saw this form of kind of transferring analog methods of commemorating and also of exhibiting or accessing, telling history to social media platforms. And we also see that certain aesthetics that are typical for these platforms were adopted. An interesting case, I think, are the so-called Instagram Stories projects, and the first one, which was groundbreaking in this regard, happened during the Holocaust Memorial Day in Israel in 2019, and that was the Insta Stories project, Ever Stories, which was based on the real diary of a young girl, a young Jewish girl in Hungary, which wrote down in her diary what she experienced in the month of the German occupation until her deportation. And interestingly, she was also dreaming to become a journalist, and that all offered an interesting way of translating the idea of the diary into what we would call a video diary or social media platforms as something that is documenting our everyday life. And so Ever Stories adopted this logic of kind of segmented story elements that together kind of offered a possibility to follow this girl and to learn more about her perspective and her everyday life. And aesthetically, Ever Stories used on the one hand the idea of the selfie perspective, a quite controversial element of social media communication with regards to history and especially the memory of the Holocaust. You just remember the selfie of Princess Brianna, a Twitter influencer who posted a photograph of herself at Auschwitz with a smiley that caused a huge controversy. But actually, also the selfie is a technique, a cultural practice to inscribe oneself into a specific space, to claim I was here, to create this notion of presence and also to kind of preserve this moment of encountering that. So the question is, of course, always what is in the center? Is the center the self, or is the center the site, the historical experience, the information gathered there? But we should not condemn the idea of the selfie from the beginning, but see this also as a practice of kind of sharing this experience and of course also of making it a part of our social media existence, and by posting it and by sharing it. And Ever Stories clearly made use of this idea of the selfie perspective, and combined it also with the POV perspective, in the sense that we have the camera witnessing, so to say, what is happening to her, by on the one hand showing herself, and also hearing what she says, and on the other hand also have this kind of documenting, witnessing aspect of the POV element here, and then that was connected to this multi-layered addressing that is typical for platforms such as Instagram and other social media platforms. And maybe it was even a step further than when TikTok became more successful, and we first saw another controversy about young creators who kind of impersonated real or fictional Holocaust victims in order to kind of create awareness for their fate in a challenge, in this kind of notion of the challenge, which is very popular on TikTok, which originally was a kind of an app dealing with lip sync, karaoke and dancing and musical challenges and things like that, and now kind of adapting this mode to kind of create a challenge where we impersonate and imitate Holocaust victims created a huge controversy. But again, we have to acknowledge that this is a way of expressing also, even if it's in a trivializing manner, but expressing, this is a relevant history. It should be part of what I'm doing here on the platform. And therefore, I think it was very important that then immediately also TikTok and the specific potential of TikTok was used in order to create other content that would help to commemorate or make visible the history of the Holocaust. So, for example, we have now several survivors of the Holocaust who are present on TikTok. Not only are these intergenerational projects where usually kind of grandsons or great-grandsons and daughters use TikTok in order to create more visibility for the stories of their grandparents or great-grandparents, but it is also a form of segmenting testimony that creates on the accounts of these survivors something like a virtual testimony that grows and grows. And what was particularly interesting is that there is an interactive element here, that we really have a kind of virtual conversation, which from my point of view goes even beyond what the Dimensions and Testimonies project of the USC Shoah Foundation did when they created this kind of virtual avatars of survivors that were connected to the questions of visitors through speech recognition and text recognition and algorithms that connected questions with answers. Also, of course, based on segments and things like that. But on TikTok, we really had the users could ask questions on the comments, and then the survivors would reply to these questions. And also, users could duet the survivors' testimonies and present themselves while listening to the survivors. So this of course also is user-generated content and forms of participatory contributing to turning such a platform into a commemorative space. And we have now really a diversity of different formats on a platform like TikTok that use the platform and that use the multi-layered structure of these videos, the possibility of additional effects like green screen to kind of interact with historical sites, interact with historical sources, photographs and texts, but also to use this really as a form of explaining about specific aspects of history, and interestingly also, or even primarily, about those aspects which are usually overlooked when we have the kind of more canonic perspective on this history. So connected to the fact that TikTok became an important tool for Generation Z users for kind of also negotiating heritage, identity and questions like that, and also became more and more politicized, we see now that many videos dealing with the history of the Holocaust, for example, also focus on the perspective of overlooked victim groups, of marginalized groups, of perspectives that are looking at these events more from the margins. So, and again, we see that this integrates into specific forms of digital storytelling, which were already prevalent in a project like Ever Stories, which we also saw in regards to other historical events and persons. The ARD, the public German television, created an Insta story about the weeks and months of the German Wende, or the kind of the end of the GDR and the changes happening back then, from the perspective of a young girl that uses Instagram to tell about her experiences, that was based on facts but mainly kind of fictional, so something like a kind of historical drama based on facts or something like this. but we can also think, of course, about the project Ich bin Sophie Scholler on Instagram for more than 1 year, following an actor impersonating Sophie Scholl, and also interacting with the audiences. What we saw is that the Sophie Scholl project, in comparison to the Eva Stories project, adopted another notion of social media, which I would call the social media activism. So to use social media in order to convey specific messages, in order to use it also as a tool for self-documentation and for addressing specific subjects. And I think this aspect of social media was cultivated specifically by focusing on the story of a German resistance member of the resistance, and on the other hand, the most controversial part maybe was, and this also is an important difference to Ever Stories, which really kind of focused very much on this idea of witnessing and media witnessing and social media witnessing. And another difference was that Sophie Scholl somehow interacted with her followers. Yeah, and this of course kind of crossed this red line of kind of bringing to life, so to say, who's not there anymore, which is nevertheless a tendency in digital memory culture. We saw that already with the virtual reconstruction of historical places, or with the idea of the kind of simulation, virtual avatars of survivors. But for many, this crossed really a line, besides the fact that the selection of Sophie Scholl is already a kind of limitation for dealing with the complex history of National Socialism and the Holocaust. But what we see here is that certain elements that are typical for social media environments are translated into new forms of dealing with history, of creating new historical narratives, or in the sense of historical storytelling in digital media formats, and also to create new forms of digital commemoration, which turn these social media platforms into digital environments for engaging with the past and with memory. First of all, of course, the segmented nature of social media posts, which also reflects in a certain way the fragmented nature of history. On the other hand, new forms of engaging with historical sources, photographs and other things, and also kind of use them and put them in new contexts and in new create new relations. Maybe that's also the biggest difference from the more kind of careful, institutionalized broadcast mode, which many institutions were using, especially until the Corona pandemic, and when more and more institutions also started to experiment with the potential of social media platforms, then to use the particular aesthetics, like the selfie aesthetic, the POV aesthetic, in order also to create a form of engaging with distant spaces or stories, to create new forms of digital storytelling in a multimodal and multi-layered way by using the different forms of addressing through text, music, voice, image, icons, emojis, and so on, captions, edit texts, and things like that. And of course also to use hashtags for interconnecting users, for creating these kind of virtual environments. So that definitely connects also to the aspect of digital curation, but from a perspective that is also going more into the direction of user-generated content and of creating a participatory memory culture, where users can become co-creators in the process of memory work, and where social media platforms are not only a place to exhibit history, but also for kind of making history a part of a social process and of a creative process. And of course, we also see the problem of distortion. We also are in dangers of trivializations, but all of this nevertheless proves that history is still relevant and that it is still and something people are interested in and care about, And also we should always keep in mind the network character of social media, so that it's usually not only this one post, but that you can then follow up and that you can kind of move forward, that you can share, that you can like, and that you can comment, and that we also see that especially younger generations, the so-called Gen Z, is interested in history, but that they are looking for new formats of engaging with it. Yes, we are talking about snackable content, but this nevertheless means that we have to find ways how to translate the complexity of history in formats that foster engagement and that create curiosity, that, so to say, one snackable content connects to the next snackable content, and that the segmented character of social media offers the possibility to create a mosaic and to connect memories in multidirectional ways, in multi-layered ways, and first and foremost also kind of put ourselves into the position of people who use this as a form of learning more, receiving more knowledge, learning more about personal stories of those who connect to also our kind of personal lives and biographies on these platforms. So here definitely we see next to preservation and access, the important third element of the digitization process in relation to dealing with history and memory, which is participation.